In a world overflowing with distractions, we seek meaning. How do we transform ambition into something deeper, into true fulfillment? I'm Pepin, CEO of Course Educa, and I've spent years helping businesses succeed by connecting their goals to something bigger. On the Meaningful Podcast, we explore not just how to win in business, but how to grow as individuals. Through conversation with thought leaders, innovators, and everyday heroes, we uncover the stories that drive us towards something greater. Whether you're striving for success, seeking purpose, or just looking for the next steps in your journey, this podcast is your guide to navigating the intersection of ambition, growth, and meaning. So please join me and our incredible guests as we redefine what's possible in both business and life. Enjoy. Children are not things to be molded, but people to be unfolded. Welcome to the Meaningful Podcasts. I'm your host, Pepin, and today we're diving into 3 transformative themes: redefining education for the 22nd century, empowering youth through creativity and resilience, and building holistic communities rooted in purpose. Our guest today is Jessica Flynn, an award-winning educator, visionary entrepreneur, and a founder of the Dream Schools Academy and the U Power Project. Jessica's mission is to empower the next generation by fostering creativity, resilience, and confidence in a rapidly changing world. Her work reimagine what education can be, inspiring students to connect with their inner genius and thrive in the face of modern challenges. If you enjoyed this discussion, please let the world know with a like, a small review, or even a quick share to support how more people find meaningful content just like this. Let's begin. Miss Jessica Flynn, welcome on the Meaningful Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm excellent, Sam. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we are very excited and honored to receive you as well. It's my first time actually meeting you, but I've read so many fantastic things about what you're doing. So to kick us off, please tell us more about the U Project, the U Power Project, please.
Absolutely. So the U Power Project for us is short term for Youth Empowerment Project. It's not that much shorter. And it's our approach to education for what we're calling the 22nd century of learning. We know that what technology, how rapid things are evolving and changing. Our school systems in Ontario, the rest of the country of Canada and beyond are just unable to keep up. And so my career started in, I have an arts background, and then I have a professional teaching background. I spent 14 years in and out of the classroom, mostly with high school. And when I became a mother myself, I was always frustrated with the education system. I'm also a serial entrepreneur, so always had one foot in the classroom, one foot out in the construction industry, the wellness industry, the private education industry. And the U Power Project came about after I had my second child, and I decided I just can't be a part of this system that I think needs so much help from the outside. And so the U Power Project is a part of the solution as we see it, which is helping to bolster what's able to be delivered by the public systems, but really trying to dig down into what is that meaningful, relevant education that students are going to need to thrive in an ever-evolving future. And that project is our response to this growing problem.
Yes, and I cannot agree with you more. We tackle this this very, very specific problem very often on the show, and just the broken education systems. One thing that was striking to me is just how much fostering confidence seems to be part of what you guys are doing, and perhaps also in resilience. Also, I think confidence and resilience are the 2 words that comes to mind first and foremost. In your words, when you're thinking about the U project, the U Power projects, and just how extensive it is, what would you say is most important process-wise to make sure that we enables our youth to basically flourish confidence and resilience-wise?
Great question. And I would add empowerment into that. I think resilience and confidence are kind of the ingredients to reach empowerment. And the other term is creativity. And so this fun fact that I'm about to share with the audience and yourself is one of the main reasons, that kind of linchpin in my decision to not return to public education. And back in 1992, NASA completed a long-term study because they were looking for more creativity in their rocket scientists. And so they followed a group of young people. And what that study found was that 98% of us as human beings are born creative geniuses. Our brains are just wired to think so creatively. And I don't know about yourself, Sam, but some in the audience may have kids at home. I've got a 6 and a 4-year-old at the time of recording this, and their creativity is just this beautiful thing to witness. But by the time the study showed we enter into early preschool, primary grades, that drops down to 30% of the population able to tap into that creative genius. By the time we're in high school, it's 12%. And by the time we're in adulthood, early adulthood, just 2% of us are able to tap into that creative genius. Scary. But the good news was that they found, just like a muscle that hasn't been exercised, that's how creativity works in our brains. And so exercising creativity in young people, and we do that through their exploration of entrepreneurship. So it's exploration of themselves through this vessel of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship has so much room for iteration, experimentation, play, also putting yourself out there, learning what your power, your uniqueness, as young as we work with students as young as 10, and how to creatively come at all of that. And we work with students in just a 6-week time period. And what we're able to see is pretty astounding. So to recap for us, that formula of reaching empowerment or fostering this next generation of empowered young people is through creativity, and then resilience and confidence come with that as well.
Right. And in one of my favorite quotes, actually, which I was not able to retrieve the author, if there's any, but it's your power lies in your ability to create change. And you just mentioned a very interesting statistics, which perhaps enables us to believe that children's through whatever, through God or anything else that you may believe, are actually created and born with creativity, but the environment, whatever, how cynical it is these days, or tyrannical, I go as far as saying that, may basically be destroying basically that creativity in the first place. Now, tell me more specifically, because obviously you're one of the best person in the world to talk about this. When you're thinking about not only just how important it is to preserve that creativity, but ways in which we can make sure that that occurs on a most optimal basis, can you share a few tips and insights you've been able to see over the years?
Absolutely. I think it's encouraging play and playfulness, and going back, okay, when did we have that 98%? What were we not doing before we got to school age? And how can we recreate that in a meaningful way? And so play is also about setting up a safe environment to play and to let students, or, we also work with adults in my consulting work, know that play is okay to come back to, and that there will be no judgment. There will be only support and reciprocal play. And so, in the container of what we do in our empowerment programming and entrepreneurship program, we have all sorts of activities where we actually start with students teaching them a little bit about the basics of neuroscience, because sometimes students need to buy in that this isn't just woo. We like a little combination, but the science that is just compounding now. We know so much more about how the brain works than we used to, and to open up their worlds to that limitless possibility and play just like they had when they were younger.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned playing. It's something that we refer so many times when it comes also to mental health, physical health, this understanding that we live in a very obviously performance focused world, which increase productivity, and there's all sorts of interesting thing with this, but definitely seems to be increasing mental wellness amongst very other catastrophic or perhaps syndromes. When you're thinking about playfulness, do you think one of many of the problems with the education systems is maybe just how rigid it is, and how perhaps it keeps us on track with something that is not playful at all and something that is more grade oriented?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you look at our current education system that was set up at the start of the Industrial Revolution, it kind of had two main objectives. We had to take care of our children. It was free childcare so that the labor force could labor. And we needed to prepare the next labor force for those factory jobs. And so even the structure of the day, arriving and answering to a bell, but then this top-down approach to our education where students are asked to choose a career to work backwards from. Our whole system is set up, our education system here in Canada, where you work backwards from this professional title. And we ask students actually as young as 12 and 13, when they're in grades 7, 8, what is going to be your academic pathway when you get to high school? When you're in high school, you're choosing electives based on what that post-secondary goal is and what the prerequisites are. And it's very calculated, but these jobs are changing so rapidly. They're being eliminated overnight, depending on what is the latest AI ability or trend. And yet the system is still built on this structure rather than a holistic approach to always evolving and being prepared for the future from a more individual, intrinsic way, a skills-based way, this resilience, this confidence, this creativity, and not so much the what will my job title be? What will my certificate say? And this rigidity too, just the way that we assess in schools. When I was a teacher, I had to give you a number. You were rated 0 to 100%. And you and I both know the workplace doesn't operate that way. And what other structure are you graded so rigidly? And so it's hard too, again, for these students to think that success and failure does not have this numeric or very tangible outcome to it. And one more point on that, Michelle Romano, who's been one of the Canadian Dragons for a number of years, she's got a great podcast in theory too. And her podcast, I believe, is called The 70% Factor. And she's made similar comments about the education system and how in her experience in entrepreneurship and startup culture is that if you can't wait until you're 100% ready or have 100% of the answers. Her magic number is 70%. And then you need that confidence, that creativity, and the resilience to know, even though I'm only 70% of the way, I've got to get this out there. I have to share my power, my idea with the world to get it to market, and then just to learn from that. But I think too, our system does not do a very good job of allowing students to be okay with iterating and failing.
Absolutely. And it's to be very completely honest, we're both entrepreneurs. Obviously, if you wait until you at 100% to start, you'll never start. That's the bottom line. It will just never happen.
Or five other people have started before you. So
no, exactly. It's all a matter of launch, refining, adjusting, and relaunching. That's just the way life works. And I think it's actually beautiful the way life works. The one thing that is very interesting to me is I think we ought to not just teach kids, but basically what to count, but also teach them what counts, which is also very interesting in a world where information is so available, basically widely available as we are today. One thing that you mentioned, which I pretty much enjoy, and I saw a lot of in your work, is kind of like the real world applications and real world success. This understanding that theory is fine, the intangibles are fantastic, but tangibly, how can we equip our youth with the tools that is necessary for them to thrive, or at least have the best chance to, perhaps? When you're thinking about some of your programs and how you basically empowers young people with entrepreneurial skills and also mentorship, which I want to get into, tell me more about basically how those programs unfold and basically what's so unique about it.
Absolutely. And I think, yes, experiential learning, or what the 22nd century learning theory uses is experimental learning, is so critical. And I think I do want to back up a little bit too, because sometimes these conversations appear like we're very hard on the public education system. And it is a big system trying to do a lot of good for a lot of people. And there are so many people in that system who are in it for all the right reasons. But when the system's so large, it's just that much slower to be able to respond. And what's interesting is that the students are seeing seeing this. They know this. Students have more access to data than ever before. So teachers are no longer the gatekeepers of knowledge. They now have this opportunity to shift their role into a facilitator of individual learning. In Ontario, I'm not sure what it maybe you refer to as in Quebec, but in Ontario, we have what's called an IEP, an individual education plan. And I think every student should have the ability to learn on an individual basis and an individual plan. But the system, with the amount of students you have in that classroom, I've had classrooms that are pushing 40, and I am this passionate and, yes, an award-winning educator, and I could not make that individual connection for my students in that environment. So to then ask you to, in that environment, make it tangible to each individual student, it's next to impossible. So what we do with the experiential part, and we know that when students, whether young or old, feel connected to the material, the rate of absorption and the depth of absorption is so much improved and so much deeper. And so with entrepreneurship, we get to, we take them through envisioning what their future could look like. And then we do this self-assessment. How do you discover your you power? And we look to the Japanese framework of ikigai, which combines, what you love to do, what you're skilled at doing, what your community needs, which I think is a big conversation that's missing when we are educating youth for future jobs, and community contribution, and then consider how you could make money combining all of those things. So it's a really self-centric approach to, okay, what is this project going to be? So that whatever they're interested in is the topic that they will explore through the 6 weeks with us. And entrepreneurship allows us to do that. It allows you, Sam, to, what do you love to do? What are you great at doing? And how can we make that what you wake up and get to do every day? And what we do with students is we say, oh, you can get to that point once you've gone through high school, once you've done your post-secondary, once you've been in the workplace. But why, our argument is, why can't they do that in grade 4 and grade 5? Why can't they get something that's so meaningful to them at that time, which will evolve? Like, we've had students who are really interested in anime, and then the next summer they work with us, they're really interested in soccer. And so to celebrate that evolution of themselves as well, and see how that can be reflected in a career, I would say that's a very long response to how we take some of that real world, I think that piece that's missing in a classroom, and inject it into our 6-week programs.
It's interesting that you say this, especially the age component. I remember when I was in school, which was not too long ago, basically very often we refer as people from, this kind of like 10 to 15-year-old gap as they're too young to basically incentivize any visions of the future. They're too young to know themselves. And to me, it was very frustrating, actually, because not only do I disagree, but I think that it's less and less the case, because, again, we live in a world where not only information is so widely available, but this urge of getting an impulse into what life you want to live is more and more valuable as the day basically unfold, which I think, once again, is one of the main problems of the modern world. When you're thinking about, let me ask you this for a second. When you were in the classes you were teaching, basically, how old were they when you were in the traditional school system?
Which were they, sorry?
How old were they?
How old were they? Oh, the students. So I
Yes.
worked mostly with high school students.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So high
so
school
starting
students.
14, 15 to 18, 20.
Okay, interesting. And now you mentioned that you started with people as young as 10, basically everything you're doing with kind of like the holistic systems you're creating. Tell me more about some of the difference between talking to a basically a 14, 15 years old about their future, and then the 10 years old. Where kind of like
I love this question, Sam. And it's funny because when I started this program, I thought, oh, this is a great this will be great for students age 15, 16, when they're starting to make their post-secondary decisions, to get them thinking about entrepreneurship. And then we had an opportunity with a client that I hesitantly said yes to, who wanted us to start at this age 10. And They blew me away, the 10-year-olds, for a number of reasons. First of all, NASA tells us that those 10-year-olds are that much closer and tapped into their creative genius. So the types of ideas that they had and that limitless potential and belief that they had was very, very exciting. So that's part of it. We know their brains are more tapped into that creativity. The second part of it is, again, with the model that we have here in Ontario, and I'm sure it's very similar across the globe, is once students are past that first year of high school, once they're into grade 10 or junior year, I guess, or sophomore year, they are they've chosen their path. And teenagers, I don't know if you know teenagers, we all were one. Teenagers think they know exactly what's best for them. They've made that decision, they're sticking to it. And so they really are more closed off. I was super surprised, but more closed off to exploring a career that is just separate from what they've kind of turned their focus to and what all the people in their circle have said. Oh, you're going to be a lawyer, a lawyer, a lawyer, a lawyer. When I come in and you're 16 and you're thinking lawyer, 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 and I say, what about entrepreneurship? They're less open. And then the third really fun piece that we've witnessed is we also run some of our cohorts with students ages 10 to 18 on the same call. And we've tried it, we've experimented a lot, we've tried it different ways. And what was really exciting to see was the 18-year-old's eyes light up when a 10-year-old, is bold enough and confident enough to put themselves on mute and share with the group that has these senior high school students in it. And we make sure that we're all set up for a very safe learning environment so that students feel comfortable to do that. Their eyes light up. These 18-year-olds are taking notes. We always think, again, like our education system is top down. You learn from the older generation, but there's so much wisdom, creativity, even that energy of let's try it and let's play. When that gets to trickle up to the older students, it is really quite exciting and magical.
And that's so beautiful. I'm sure it's so beautiful because one thing that my first mentor taught me is basically every time you teach, you learn, and every time you learn, you teach. This understanding of mentorship, reverse mentorship, we call it these days. In your classroom, and we're gonna get into basically the dream school and the academy. We're kind of like hovering around it a little bit here, but how meaningful is that for you as an educator and somebody obviously that deeply, well, you strike me as somebody that's deeply passionate. How beautiful and meaningful is that basically you can see it kind of like emerging two generational, right? At least two different age gaps, an age range, but trying to basically bettering themselves and bettering others to basically sharing with the classroom. Tell us more about on an emotional level, how does that make you feel?
I think it's wildly inspiring and hopeful. And I think, again, the way that we approach education is age-based. So regardless of what academic level you may actually be able to achieve, we organize you by age. And to have a space where we can kind of crumple that idea and toss it aside and see what's possible when we mix ages and stages. I think there's a lot of fear in education as well of, yes, we're working with the vulnerable sector. There's so much to do to protect these students, but then there is so much potential and magic when we can bring them together in community. And when we talk about this brick and mortar school that we've now been inspired to start, it is that community and multi-generational approach to learning. And I think too, it's exciting to think when we embrace technology in that traditional system, how can the teachers re-immerse themselves and see and learn from their students again without so much pressure and red tape? I think if we look at education as an interest based and then as an ability base and not just age, we would all learn profoundly, I think, deeper and a lot of action for big change could happen in those rooms.
And no, absolutely. Let's get into it actually, because, like I said, we were hovering around the subject, but what we're talking about, and it's kind of like your vision of what a dream school can look like, kind of like an holistic learning environment. Basically, the Academy of South Georgian Bay, which seems to be a private high school from my research, and obviously focusing on all these things we talked about, the visions, the emergence of different age bettering themselves, and so on. One thing that was always interesting to me when I was at school is it's such a big emphasis on basically making better student instead of better human beings, which in my opinion is just so much more important when you're juggling with basically a very wide curriculum, obviously so many things to teach these kids. How perhaps can we strike a balance into what's important in the classroom, but then also what's important for them growing up in a healthy environment for their success after school?
Well, and I think digging into that question, what makes a successful student? Why do we need successful students as opposed to successful humans? And again, going back to the origin of this current system, and at that time where a lot of our systems were established, we needed good students so that we had good employees and good workers. But as this employment model changes, as the job opportunities change, it seems to be, and this is a whole other discussion on the ethics and evolution of AI, but a lot of conversations I've been a part of have been looking at the rapid evolution of AI as this opportunity for us to become more human. If we can automate a lot of the more robotic type jobs that many of us are doing, what does that free us up to do? Is it more art, creative thinking, bringing community together? And now is then that not the role of the education system to move away from preparing the quote unquote good student to, like, how you phrased it. Now, how do we equip great humans? And so the idea was, with the school, the Academy of South Georgian Bay is a not-for-profit alternative high school, because we also believe that this type of new age education, quality education, just like the public system offers, needs to be accessible to all those families who are interested, where a school like ours would be the perfect fit for a student. It won't be for everyone, but we hope that it will be for many. That financial barriers are not barriers. So yes, we're focused on the holistic human development of our students, not just their academic achievement.
Very interesting. There's a few things that I want to rebound on this on your comments. First of all, obviously, in for our audience, we have a worldwide audience, but the Canadian education system is one of the cheapest actually in the world, especially in developed countries. There is still obviously some kerfuffles with financial obviously struggle. You mentioned something that is very interesting to me, which is the being a non-for-profit and the understanding that your school can be an alternative to some people that may have this diverse basically struggle. When you are, and you're a mother also of two, and you've been able to be very successful, so congratulations. But for a family, basically trying to give the best education to their children's, how big of a pressure and a weight on the shoulder the monetary aspect can be basically within education?
A huge barrier. I think, my own children, I've done well thanks to my partner as well. But we're still, our own children are in the public education system. And so this financial, you're looking at anywhere between 15 to 25,000 a year typically per child, and that's starting at the elementary level schools. So this is Montessori. These are private K-8 schools. And so what is happening is more and more families are pulling away from the public education system because it is so strained and it is so difficult for their own children to be seen in that space. And they are putting their priority into this private education, but that's simply not available to most families, including my own right now. And so with this not-for-profit model, the idea is that to be a sustainable, independent organization, we would, of course, appeal to families who can afford our tuition for full time. But our kind of open door is an after school program that is community funded, grant funded, philanthropically funded, that opens the door to students from neighboring high schools to join us after their school ends while our school is still operating, to be a part of what we're calling our change making block, which is our final block of the day. And that's our way of opening the door. I think as we're climbing the ladder and building this new future of education, it's so important always to keep that door open to as many others as possible who might not have the golden financial ticket to participate in this new wave of this new system.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is so important, and I believe that very much of the thinking of Socrates on this topic, where education is so fundamental to any human beings that it should be as widely accessible as possible. Do you think that we're making a stride in the right directions with diverse, basically alternative, basically prospects, and different schools basically priding themselves on affordability? Can basically the world, and maybe more specifically Ontarians and Canadian in your case, can foresee positive basically steps in the right direction when it comes to that basically threshold?
I think so. And again, we have to remain in that camp of hope, especially those of us with young children at home, because sometimes, you're scared and frustrated. But actually, on the international stage, I'd shared an article recently that MIT has just announced a program that I thought was a new program. It's not, but where tuition for families making $200,000 a year or less, this is household income, tuition to those students who apply, it's a very rigorous program to get into, receive free tuition. And students coming from families who make $100,000 US or less per household income a year will not only receive tuition, but housing, food, and books and a personal allowance. And I've shared that with several of my colleagues in the education industry and beyond, just concerned parents who I do believe that is the future of education. I don't think we can hide behind the fact that students around the globe can access the content that was once gatekept by these organizations. And so they have to look at, MIT has a massive endowment fund, and same with schools like Harvard that they've been building for generations. But I do think higher education is actually becoming more accessible through programs like that, but also just the democratization of accessing data. I think what is still needed is that human connection and that coach or mentorship or learning facilitation to help make that content relevant to the goals, to the skills, to the talents and interests of each individual. And that's a very exciting place to see, I think, education going towards.
Absolutely. And one thing that also very much define you is the entrepreneurships and kind of like the leadership required to do so. And it's interesting because you mentioned obviously prior to this, the goal of having better people and better students. It's not only because they can have better grades or whatever is entitled to that space, but it's because we want them to thrive in the future, because when our children thrives, society thrives and everybody thrives. There's the way it is. And when you're thinking about your ability of building highly engaged teams and very much of a people-centric person, you strike me as kind of like one of these kind of like postmodern people-centric basically type of educator. I love what Lisa Aisha had to say on this, actually, which is great leaders don't set out to be leaders. They set out to make a difference, right? It's not a title. It's not just a matter of, hey, I'm basically the leader in this place. No, it's about basically sharing a way in which you can make a difference of your own. When you're thinking about your strategies to unleash basically what you call the unique genius of employees and creating winning team, what do you think set the winning teams apart? What are they doing that others are not? And perhaps reflect on some of your perhaps insights on that.
Absolutely. I think I keep saying too, if I didn't have to open a school, I wouldn't. If I could wave the magic wand and slash class sizes in half and give some additional prep time and professional development to educators, that would solve that problem. But so I do think that for big change, at some point, someone just has to show what's possible and what's different and dive in. And yeah, it's not at all about the ego. It's bringing people along and learning and iterating along the way. And so to translate what we do with corporate teams and small businesses, I work with a lot of not-for-profit organizations as well. And people management, people empowerment is what, we have a great workshop called the Empowered People's Playbook. And it really is the roadmap. So it's not, I come in for an hour, rah, and then I leave. It's, here are then the 14 steps you take to integrate this into the team. And included in that workshop, we talk about NASA's genius discovery and looking at your team as these baby geniuses, and how could we tie and help tap back into each individual's genius. Well, then you have to go back and figure out what are they really passionate about independently outside of this organization. So almost an ikigai exercise. When you are learning about your team, learn about them, not just their professional title and their professional background. Who were they when they were 12? What did they want to see? What did they envision for themselves? And you get to be a part of that journey for them. And I think taking responsibility for being a very important part of their lives, they're choosing to spend 30, 40 hours a week with you in your organization. How are you honoring them as human beings, not as that student, that employee? And how can you help make the work that you do together on your team relevant to their ikigai, to their you power? I think transparency and that mentorship, like a mentor is very different than a top-down boss telling you what to do. A mentor is that coach who wants you to reach your Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that self-actualization. That is possible within organizations. Not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. We need intrapreneurs, so people on your team who have the autonomy to think creatively, to bring in their unique lived experiences and stories and bring that and inject that into what you're doing. There's so much that what we do with our youth and what we're seeing in the school can be brought into and translated into corporate and, team development and strategy.
Absolutely. One of my favorite psychologists of all time is Laszlo Polgar, and he basically had. I don't know if you know who that is and his story a little bit. Laszlo is a fantastic gentleman, and he had this very famous quote, which is "Geniuses are not born; they're built." And he basically were able to prove that through his children's. So basically, through his children's, he was teaching them chess at a very young age, and he actually became some of the youngest grandmaster of all time. And so he had this methodology of building geniuses, perhaps this idea that, yes, sure, some people are born obviously with IQ points or things that can basically benefit them towards this journey, but pretty much anyone with rigorous and focused training can become a genius of some sorts, which I think is the prowess of very biblical scriptures, and any basically content of equality that we ever had. Is there's something special about you, so let's tap into it and make the most of it. When you're working with teams, and you just mentioned small businesses, how big of an organization are we typically talking about for your work?
For my work, I work with from solopreneurs to kind of teams up to 40. So I managed a tourism resort organization. We had a team of 40. So kind of that definitely under 500 mark.
Sure.
Yeah.
Small organizations, when you're so basically kind of like startups or kind of like early stage of businesses, or also businesses that have been there for decades but just trying to perhaps get to the next
Reinvent
level?
themselves, or yeah, for sure. I mean, startup is definitely a niche that I thrive in. I get called in early on to set up strategy and operating systems and culture, establishing culture. And then a new term, it's not new, but it was something I've been seeing for the last couple of years, is regenerative business practice. So we've been talking about sustainable business practice for a while, but sustainable means sustain, exactly that. Keep doing what you're doing. Whereas we have so many critical crisis level issues on our planet related to climate, related to housing. We're in a very interesting economic time. We have war raging. We cannot sustain anything that we're doing. Everything needs to, be addressed at this crisis level. So in business practice, an interesting and exciting place to be too is when businesses who have been around for a while are looking at how can we be a part of this new wave? How can we not only sustain, but have regenerative business practices? So our business that has been successful for the last number of years, how can we use this as a leverage tool to make the planet a better place, to improve quality of life and employability for our community, to give back to our communities. And you can do that while still being profitable. You do not have to be a not-for-profit or a charity to do a good thing. And I think the future of business too is having that more corporate responsibility and hopefully a more conscious consumer, because there are so many more options now where we can make our spending choices more consciously and hold large organizations accountable for being a part of the solution to some of our great problems.
Yeah, you're talking about basically what you mention as sustainable development goals, which is something you talk about quite a bit, the triple bottom line, and which I love. I dive into it with some of my company as well. When you're thinking about the triple bottom line, which is people, planet, profit, in that specific order. Is that I believe that's your idea, right? This conceptualizations of this process is it from yours, or what type of inspiration did you get to
Absolutely.
put
I
it
mean, I
together?
certainly did invent the triple bottom line, but I think again, having young children working with youth and then looking out the window or God forbid, watching the news. And sometimes it's very, very defeating. How is what I'm doing actually going to be a part of the solution? So to me, the sustainable development goals just gives us a framework to work within. So when this type of thinking is new for an organization, I spoke about sustainable development goals in education a year and a half ago at a conference in Las Vegas. And my fellow panelists, we had met weeks before virtually to discuss our approach to the topic. And after being at the conference for a day, I mean, first of all, we were in one of the probably least sustainable cities on the planet. We were at a giant casino in the middle of a desert. But we realized we had to start from the very beginning. We had to ask everybody to take out their phone and Google the SDGs, which stands for Sustainable Development Goals. And that was really eye-opening. We have one of the wealthiest, largest countries in the world where the majority of the population responsible for teaching youth and the next generation didn't know what that was. And it wasn't anything like, not to shame anyone. It was, wow, okay, now we know where we have to start. And so I do use that framework with all the businesses that I do consulting work, and we introduce it to our students, because I think when our problems are so great, it can be very overwhelming. And so I think the SDGs gives us a beautiful, colorful framework. And yes, we see there are at least 17 major core issues facing our global humanity. But if you can just choose one to be connected to, we started with SDG number 4, which is quality education. We're now seeing that decent work and economic growth, which is SDG 10 or 8, and SDG 10 is essentially collapsing inequity, and how can we bring more folks to the table with these big changes. So it just gives you something to paint the picture into. And so we introduce this to the clients we work with in the consulting side. Great, you have a retail clothing company. How could you choose one of these and be a little bit more mission driven and analyze your impact, and then now all of your clients are along for that ride with you and are looking at fashion a different way, or looking at how they make their retail choices a different way. And so we can't discount this trickle down effect and the butterfly effect of when one organization makes a decision to be a part of change, what that actually translates to is wide impact.
Yes, 100%. And I believe sustainability is no longer about doing less harm. It's about actively thinking about how can do more good. And that paradox is very important. That dynamic is very important because most of the time what I see on major panels is this obsessions with basically doing less harm, which is fine. It's still a great place to start. And how can we repurpose basically these efforts to actually actively doing more good and not just type of repurposing the mess to another a topic to another one, which we see quite a bit. Do you think company these days, to me at least, they seem to be as aware as they ever been, basically, when it comes to sustainability, thinking about the planet, this understanding that you might be able to be associated with a nonprofit as well. All of those basically what I call basically social credits are very interesting if they are well used. In your opinions, as the world is awareness is shifting more and more towards an unconceivable understanding that those things are necessary to take a look at. Do you think that the big companies would have a must change when it comes to how they operate and how they bring basically their vision to life in the future?
Absolutely. And I think it's because their stakeholders and client base are starting to have their own mandates and demands on who they're able to do business with, depending on, at the end of the day, everyone's motivated by money and the one element of the bottom line, that profit, and that will be the driver. And I do think that you can do business in this regenerative way. I think we're seeing that you can do this in a regenerative way and be more profitable than ever. So for an example, in our area, I helped a not-for-profit organization, the Collingwood Climate Action Team, work with the Green Economy Canada to get a pilot project up and running, where we would have a green economy hub whose sole purpose would be to help small businesses and local organizations enter into that sustainable and then regenerative space. And in promoting this opportunity, we had to, at the end of the day, these businesses, they'll only invest in this mentorship program essentially that gets them certified and metrics and that they can share with their audiences. But if it's not going to make them more money at the end of the day, the interest simply wasn't there. People want to do good, but not at the cost. So one of the organizations was a large engineering firm, and they came to the table saying, thank goodness, because our clients are now, this is a part of the RFP process, is we need to show what we're doing and we need to have metrics and we need to be certified by reputable organizations, because we also want to be careful not to encourage businesses to greenwash, to say they're doing things that they're not doing. So again, I look to frameworks. We don't need to keep reinventing the wheel. There are lots of organizations that are coming up to help give us some structure to making these changes.
Absolutely. And one of my great friends, Sir Greg Petrie, you always say this, but he says entrepreneurs are the saviors of the world. When you're thinking about where the creativity comes from and where basically change occur, I'm a firm believer that basically entrepreneurs and small businesses, which by the way employs over, I think it's over 60% of people, basically all people in Canada are employed by small businesses. Though that's very major, and we have very much of an economy that are driven by the social consciousness, not only of the small players but also the big players, where big money and big things occur on a way more basically grandiose level. When you're thinking about, we were just talking about kind of like social entrepreneurships and how that basically blended as a tool to create impactful and sustainable solutions. With your understanding of what it is to teach young people, because you're doing that on a daily basis, when you're thinking about some of the things that we as mentors, as people that are in business, as people that basically are trying to drive positive change, what are some of the best way you found to not only teach, but I suppose educate the young folks to be more socially aware and perhaps leading them through a way where they can discovering themselves and through it perhaps bettering the world afterwards?
Yeah, great question. I think also acknowledging that these younger generations have a lot of fear and anger with the situation that has been put in front of them. They have not made any of the decisions that have resulted in their reality. And so to acknowledge that and hold space for that, but then try and get them to live in that camp of hope and action. And every student I have ever worked with over my 14 years as an educator, they want to do. Yes, we need to talk through it and introduce some theory, but they want to act. And I think as mentors and coaches out there, allow your students a platform to try it out, to share their ideas with the world outside of whatever environment you may be working with them in. That's why robotics competitions are so popular. Let's theorize what is possible, but then actually show up in community and demonstrate what we built as a team. And there are lots of projects that could be done in a similar structure to these robotics competitions for students who are more artistic or performance-based. I think athletes have so much in common with entrepreneurs, and there's so much overlap there. So how can we engage young people who are interested in sport and start delivering some of these messages and giving them projects based on their physical abilities and how they can share that with their communities to affect change. I've worked with so many or tried to work with many organizations who work with youth, and people are tired. The grant system of, having to have these programs and projects that are not, these people are singing for their supper to keep themselves relevant in certain organizations, and that weight often takes away with what we can actually accomplish with students. So looking for that sustainability and regenerative models for the organizations that work with youth, so that we can just go and do the work and give platform to students to share their ideas. I believe that every municipality, every city, every board should have a seat at the table for at least one youth. And I think that would be some of the most valuable insight that any organization could receive.
I'm so glad you mentioned build, because we just have Mark Zuckerberg, obviously one of the most affluent and influential person in the world, came out with a very direct and quite crude actually statement, which is people don't care about what you say, they care about what you build. In your experience, in your actually very extensive experience, do you agree with that quote? How do you feel when somebody of that stature come up with such a statement?
I mean, I think, I wouldn't put much weight on what anybody says. I think in action is one thing. And also, there's the quote of people don't remember necessarily what you did, but how you made them feel. And I think combining that empathy and that human connection, how you make others feel, with the Zuckerberg action, what a powerful formula. But the time is up. I mean, Greta said it to us probably a decade ago. How dare you? And how dare we keep on this timeline? Things are just moving too slowly. And so it's been time for action for a while now.
Interesting. It's been time for actions in a while now. I love it. I love it. It's interesting because with everything that we're doing in a very performance-based, basically mentality, we've been seeing that actually productivity is actually basically plateauing to a certain extent. And therefore that might be resonating with the fact that there's a lot of big talkers and maybe we need more big doers. Why not? And I want to go into a very philosophical thoughts, basically for moments here. One of the many things that I love doing with many people is think of them in timelines. I talk about this quite often. I'm actually writing a book on it, but basically the past, the present, the future, how they interact basically with who you are and what you're trying to do. To me, it's always interesting because I love, and I've always been a part of people way older than myself. I was always the young kid with the 50 years
Am
old
I
at the
way older than you,
It's,
Sam?
it's, well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you're way older. You seem quite actually very young to me. But
I'm kidding.
the point I'm making is I always been a big advocate to have consultant and mentors that basically talk in the past tense. It's understanding that they've been through things, and through that experience, they shape who they are, and therefore their insights emerge from the tangible world. I call those basically the nostalgics. I have most of my consultant and mentors are nostalgics. They're people that are a little bit older. They've been through things. They've been through ups and downs, and that's very major. Then we have the doers, the people that talks in the present tense. I am doing, I am building, we are working on. Those doers are what basically strive organizations to move forward with their idea. It doesn't matter how great the idea is, if there's nobody to implement it, will remain an idea. Just like Zook said, nobody will care about it after a while. You need to actually take actions towards it. Then you have the visionaries, and I think you're very much a visionaries. I consider myself a visionary. People that talk in the future, right? How can this look like? How can we make this better? And when you're thinking about that timeline for yourself and some of your projects, basically, and also who you are as a person, a mother, people, an empowerment of the youth, also. I how perhaps you see these timeline collapsing in such ways that is meaningful to teach our children that, hey, you are the futures, and obviously, as we are the present tense, let us teach you about what we know, but perhaps try to expand on it, because I'm a firm believer that from generation to generations we gain things. We actually we lose things along the way, there's no doubt, but we gain many things of a lot of values. How can perhaps the world can be a little bit more balanced when it comes to listening to the youth, to what they have to say, to their concerns, and how that shaped the world? Can you tell me a little bit more about how did that unfold in a
Hmm.
professional setting?
Sure. I think there are so many components to that prompt. And again, looking at the system as our children are in it right now, where we ask them to prepare, go to school, then try, um, and combining, yes, future, and I would never put down formal education or post-secondary education, but looking at it as a component of the journey, a component of how we equip our youth for the future, and not the whole solution. And so giving them these opportunities on that journey, to put it into practice, to show that, yes, if you go down this path, you can create real change, and you have been a part of real change. So there's that piece of it. I think too, there's this great book that I read. It's called The Principle of 18. It's E.L.N. Dannon is the author. And yes, it's this principle that our lives are divided up into 5 quadrants of 18-year periods of time. And the way he writes it is, so 0 to 18, ages 0 to 18, should be all about believing. So envisioning, seeing, getting inspired, believing that anything is possible, setting aside limitless possibility, the dream, the play. It's about dreaming and playing. Then from 18 to 36 is explore. And he says, the author says, we should encourage folks to explore at least 3 completely different industries. So I've been, for example, in the wellness industry, the education industry, the construction agency, plus many others. And that you should just explore. You're still figuring out your ikigai. I always say to my students who are 10, 11, 12, you haven't met most of the people you're going to meet yet. You haven't been to most of the places you're going to be yet. So how dare we ask you to choose what you're going to spend your life doing right now? So to really celebrate the exploratory phase, and not just explore until you get to post-secondary, then double down. The book says at 36, that's when you double down. You evaluate where you had the most success, where you made the most impact, what you had the most fun doing, and that's then where you build. So the 36 to 54 years is your build phase. Then from 54 to 72 is the mentorship. and then it goes to give back. So what you were saying about this multi-generational, and we have the visionaries, but we also need the doers. I think there's also a time and space in our lifetime to thrive in each of these quadrants of this approach.
Wow. I love how you tie this in. That was not easy by any means. That's great analogy right there. One thing that's always and I've been obviously I do a lot of research on all guests to make sure we're very prepared for a very meaningful conversations. One thing you talk a lot about and you seem to draw a lot of inspiration from is nature. And when you're thinking about the power of nature and also kind of like your family, I would love if you can, in a meaningful fashion, kind of like reflect on basically not who you are, but also how you draw inspiration from nature to shape this life of yours, which is, multi-level to say the least. How do you combine all these things to make sure that you also have a meaningful life yourself?
Wow, what a beautiful question. For me, if this episode has demonstrated anything, I'm definitely busy. I try not to be busy for busy's sake, but to drive change. But coming down and to my authentic self, for lack of a better term, nature has always done that for me. And we live close to Georgian Bay, up right on Georgian Bay. So just the calmness of the waves, but also seeing how that body of water changes in different seasons and different days, and just offers a lot of perspective. Walking without a device. I love listening to podcasts, Sam, and I've tried to make a very conscious effort to walk without anything in my pocket or in my ears. And that's where a lot of creativity comes. And I was listening on a walk to a book called The Source by Dr. Tara Swart. So she was an MIT neuroscientist. She's who got me fully believing in the power of a vision board, because she came at it from this very MIT sciencey background. And as I was listening to her, she said, walking and listening to a book or listening to a podcast, you're multitasking. You're not fully focused. So I feel like nature gives this opportunity to be fully present, which I'm not very good at doing or being. Also with my children. So when we are out in nature together, the phone is away, the earbuds are out, and we are exploring and having them see the world, watching them see the world in nature, and the types of questions that they ask also brings us back to this. We are nature as humans. And the way that we used to raise children was always in community. And the way that North America is doing things right now is so siloed, so isolating. Everyone needs to have their own 4 or 5 bedroom house. That is the measure of success, as opposed to healthy, happy humans coexisting with nature. So yes, like you said, nature is a part of how I'm able to sustain this energy and this commitment to myself, to our students, to my clients, but also to this planet that we've done so much harm to, but has shown us how she can regenerate. And yeah, so.
Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. One of the most profound quotes by one of the most profound person, Lao Tzu, in my opinion, ever exist. Miss Jessica Flynn, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on the Meaningful Podcast for one of the most insightful conversations that I've had in a while. Would you mind sharing your last thoughts with our audience, please?
We all have the capacity to be a part of change and to make meaningful change. And I think you just go back to that ikigai, go back to that voice when you were a youth yourself, that you just knew what you were here to do and how you were here to do it, and come back to that person. Go out in nature if you're having trouble, to come back to that person and envision not only what's possible, but know that we need you and your unique you power to be a part of the change and of the solution building.
Thank you for spending your time with us today on the Meaningful Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or share it with someone who could benefit from it. And always remember, your story matters. Make it meaningful. We hope to see you next time.